when they fund significant new ventures in the sport community, and we're talking very large dollar projects. These will be projects going to be multi-millions of dollars. And so one of the fun ways they do it is through something called revenue bonds. So again, we're still looking at publicly supported sport. So the word public is always going to be associated with some form of government agency. In this instance, it's a metropolitan community, so let's call it a municipality. And that would be for this instance, let's call it a large city. Large city, such as in Atlanta, or Columbus, Ohio, just two examples. Cleveland. So large cities that already have established professional franchises, they've already got relationships. The city has a relationship with the football team, the city has a relationship with the basketball team, the city has a relationship with the hockey team. So it's usually going to be your major sport properties, NBA, NHL, NFL, MLB. What am I forgetting? I got it right. So cities that have an already established franchise or multiple franchises with some of your major professional sport properties, obviously from time to time they need to upgrade their facilities. So we're looking at the funding of either a brand new or an upgraded facility. It doesn't have to just be the venue. A lot of times they play in the convention centers. So they need training facilities, they need practice facilities, they need housing facilities, they need office facilities. So when I say facilities, it's not just the field where they play or just the stadium. There could be a variety of things there. These scenarios require hundreds of millions of dollars. So in these situations, we're talking about financing for hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas the Drive Stadium downtown cost about $10 million, which was a lot for Greenville and which was a lot for the community to absorb and in situations like that. This particular stuff that I'm talking about now is the most significant form of financing designed for the most significant form of facilities or venues that we have within our sport community. Now, in all instances, 95% of the time, the venues are owned and operated by the public. There are some examples, but there are very few mega sport venues that are actually owned privately. There's a few examples. I believe Daniel Snyder for a long time owned the stadium where the Washington Redskins played. There's probably a handful of other examples, but going around the country, and this particular here in the West, 95% of all the venues that are owned and operated and used in professional sports settings are basically public entities. So what happens is, and I've said this before, is that the franchise will lease space at the venue and the facilities. So in 99% of these situations, with the exception of the private ownership, your franchises are always going to be a leaseor and a leasee situation. So the leaseor leases from the leasee. So that's what allows the franchise to be able to mobily hold a city hostage, give me a new venue, or I'll go somewhere else, because they're a lease-based tenant. It's a lease-tenant relationship. And they can break the lease and pay the fees and move on. The lease runs out. A lot of times they'll do it toward the end of the lease. And so usually these leases are somewhere between 5 and 10 years. They used to be lower to 5. Cities today are really trying to get them more in that 10-year range, because if you're going to invest considerable dollars into a new venue, you want the commitment of the team to be there 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 years to be able to take care of and paying the venue. And when we do the revenue bonds, that'll make sense to you, because the revenue bonds, the revenue is contingent on the team being there and the activities happening. And so to pay off the revenue bonds, you have to have this long-term commitment from the team to stay there, to operate, to perform their duties, that kind of thing. So in order to fully finance new venues, cities need to have some comfort level, some commitment level that the franchise will stay here a considerable amount of time. That motivates us to then go ahead and float money and figure out how to either renovate a facility or build a new venue or expand the current venue. Okay, I'm going to erase and continue to move on. Now again, we're videoing this, so you can always go back and watch the videos. So once there's a level of commitment that is in place, from the franchise to the public. Now, who owns the franchise? Well, that could be the individual, could be a single person, could be a group, could be a group of corporations, LLCs, C Corp, S Corp, for example. So it could be several groups, C Corp or S Corp. So the franchises today aren't just individually owned and operated. They could be family. Remember, we talked about how they're families. The Steinbrenner family, the Mara family, the Rooney family. There are still families that own sole proprietorship or the entity itself, and they pass it down through the family, through the familial relationships. Franchises have to make a commitment to the public. They do so in the form of the lease arrangement. So within the lease is what you have is the term. The term limit, that's the length of time. And that's probably one of the biggest things that the public extracts from the lease is, I'm going to do this and upgrade this facility, but you need to commit to 10 years. You'll do it in writing. If you break it, it's significant cost to you. And so then the franchise owners sign saying, yes, we'll do it. And here's all the stipulations, and it's all well laid out. Those leases are sometimes hundreds of pages long. Once the commitment is in place, then we can work on facilities. Upgrades, renovations, new technology, enhanced this, Videotrons, media, more of that. But until that lease arrangement is in place, it's hard for either side to commit a whole lot. The truth is, the public entity doesn't want to commit dollars until we know they're going to be here for long periods of time, because we need to be able to recoup the dollars and pay for it. We'll pay for it through the venue itself and through the venture. They are always looking, the franchise owners are always looking to maximize their profits, because remember, they're a for-profit entity. These guys are all about profits. So they're always looking to maximize their, shareholder equity. I want that asset to grow. It's called the net asset value. Now, I've mentioned this before. The NAV is the net asset value. How much is my franchise worth? Remember, we talked about capital appreciation. Want the franchise to grow in value. How much is it worth? Well, we look at the balance sheet. We keep the balance sheet. We're doing those things constantly. That distinguishes for us the value, the equity, the shareholder equity, and the net asset value. If you looked up a stock today, I was showing somebody earlier in the office, the price on a stock is nothing more then a breakdown of the net asset value. So if I look at, for example, Nova Royalty right now, $2.27 a share. The net asset value, based upon the number of shares that are outstanding, is $2.27 a share. There might be 10,000 shares outstanding. Multiply that by 10,000 shares. That tells you how much the company's worth divided by the number of shares. So that's basically a ratio. So franchise owners always want to see the capital appreciation, remember the growth in the overall organization, because one day they're going to sell it, and that's where they cash in. Remember, that's why the rich people get involved. They get involved with this stuff because they see it's a great investment and it really has appreciation, really grows. Part of that appreciable growth is derived from the public committing new facilities. So when the franchise owners, through the form of a lease, can get upgraded facilities, when they can get upgraded facilities, they can actually make more money. So by upgrading facilities, we can charge more. More for parking, more for ticketing, more for concessions, more for programs, more for season tickets, more for all our special events. So franchise owners know if I can leverage the asset to a point where I can increase my facilities, improve my facilities, enhance my facilities, then I'll generate more revenue from that. So it's in their best interest to always work with the public to have a great lease relationship so they can enhance their facilities, because when we enhance our facilities, everybody wins, but particularly these guys do, because they enhance the value of their organization. And in the end, as a businessman, we want to grow our business. We want to make it more valuable. So it's always in our best interest to work with our public partners to increase the overall value of our organization. So now let me show you how we get there. That is more macro. Now I want to go more micro. Okay, so when the franchise wants a new facility, let's just say a new venue, and the public says, okay, we will deliver on that because you've given us a new 10-year lease. We can now work out the negotiations to begin to design and fund and build a new venue. And this is fun for a lot of these groups because this is where you really make some serious hay, and that's a good thing. So once the relationship has been solidified and committed to, and there's a level of satisfaction, what's called equity built into this, then we can move into designing and building new venues for our community-based businesses, which is our franchises. So the first thing they'll do is they'll do a feasibility study. What's it going to cost to upgrade the current venue, to add on to the current venue, to make some significant renovations or reformations to the venue, to do an entire facelift on the outside, or enhance the tech on the inside, all kinds of things. First thing we do is we do a feasibility study, and we determine what's the cost. And the public representatives and the franchise representatives work together. They'll form what's called a steering committee. A couple of folks from the local community, the community office, to be the mayor or the county council, some of those key, like the CFO, some of their main finance dudes or gals, will work with some of the franchise finance people. They say, okay, let's hire a group or a couple of groups, do some feasibility studies, find out what it's going to cost to either upgrade our facility or build a new venue or expand or have new practice facilities, whatever it is. And for the sake of doing this on this particular process here, we're going to say a new stadium we'll say, Jim, help me out. It might be a little high, but we'll use it as a rounded figure to kind of get to where we're going. We come to the conclusion that a brand new state-of-the-art stadium will cost $400 million to build, and it'll take, let's say, 12 months. Now, these are just well-rounded, nice, neat, clean numbers. It's never this neat. But for the sake of understanding the mechanism here, once the feasibility work is done, and then both sides digest it, they don't have sticker shock, they digest it, they say, okay, this is doable, yeah, okay, it was 500 million, they hacked it down, they did some things, they've got it to 400 million, everybody's happy, they got the time frame, and the feasibility study then shows us, okay, the local community is able to support this. That's the second thing a feasibility study determines is if we go up in price of tickets and merchandise and parking and we adjust our financial strategies as a team and we adjust our financial strategies as a local community, we can not only get there, but then we can support it. That's the second thing is you have to be able to support it. You can't build something that prices out of your marketplace and doesn't work. So the feasibility study kind of makes all these determinations for us. We don't make these decisions just willy-nilly or offhand. It's always data-driven decisions. We look at the data, we look at the demographics, we pray about it as church-based Christian kind of folk. But importantly, we're making data-driven, metric-driven decisions to make sure that we're not overbuilding. Remember in the Bible it says you got to count the cost before you build because then you may run out of money. Or in this instance, if you overbuild and then you have to charge the local community too much, they can't afford to pay for it, and then you go under. So that's unfortunately, we see that way too much in businesses. Too many business entrepreneurs bite off too much they can chew, and then they try to force it down the throats of the local community, and the local community won't support those numbers, and so therefore the business doesn't generate enough revenue to pay off its indebtedness, and then when it can't pay off its indebtedness, it goes out of business. Catch my breath back here. Yeah. Taking some notes on your phone, I like that. I'm doing the recording up here, you don't need to record it back here. Got it. Once the feasibility work is done and everybody's committed to the next venture, now we figure out how to fund it. We look at our tax base and we say, well, what if we raise taxes, property tax, sales tax, specialty tax? Will that generate enough money to be able to compensate that? And most likely it's going to be no. Because remember, these specialty taxes, we only have a 0.1 or a 0.2 or 0.05. We don't have a lot of leeway there. We just can't raise taxes like the federal government. Your current president wants to raise taxes tremendously on you. Well, in the local level, we don't have an ability just to double the sales tax or triple the real estate tax. Nor would that be digestible to put everybody out of business. So we recognize that no matter how much we tinker with the taxes, we're never going to get to the $400 million price tag in an expedient amount of time. So that's off the table. So the only other option then is to go a bond route. And in this particular instance, we're going to choose revenue bonds. Now, there's other types of bonds. The general obligation bond is probably the most predominant bond for smaller based businesses, but a $400 million stadium is a significant price tag, and it generates a significant amount of cash flow. And therefore, the cash flow that it generates can be leveraged against the indebtedness of the bonds. So we're going to select revenue bonds because the new stadium is going to generate a lot of revenue. And therefore, out of the revenue of the new stadiums, we will pay back the bonds. So to build it, you have to borrow money. Out of the income generated, a significant amount of that will be dedicated to pay back the indebtedness. It's known as the payback of the bonds with built-in interest rates. Let's say through the first 10 years. Now I'll give you a little bit more detail, but the macro story is we float revenue bonds because we know there's guaranteed revenue in here, and I'll show you 2 or 3 of the guarantees. The guaranteed money can be automatically allocated to the repayment or the payback of the bonds to the bond holder. So that's the larger mechanism. Now, most venues, like a public golf course or a skate park or a marina or a local tennis complex, you can't float revenue bonds because local communities don't generate significant amounts of revenue from those particular public arenas or public venues. So they don't qualify for revenue bonds. Because we're talking about a major tier 1 professional sport facility for a 10-year dedicated franchise, there's going to be a lot of revenue that draws out of that. Guaranteed money from sponsorships and contracts and naming rights. And so a lot of that early money can be dedicated to paying off those bonds. So it basically justifies the bond route. And so what happens then is the city hires a bond company. And a bond company will rate the situation. They'll take the city, they'll take the franchise, they'll take the feasibility study, and they'll give them a rating. They'll say, you know what, this situation looks really good. The city has great financials. The franchise has great financials. They're committed to each other in 10 years. The feasibility study turned out really well. This private group or several groups have determined that this thing's going to work. And so we're going to rate this maybe AAA rating. So a bond company can come in and do what's called due diligence and determine that this situation can be rated really highly. Now that high rating is very important to individuals who look at buying and selling bonds. So the bond company will actually create what are known as AAA bonds. So you get a AAA rating. So they create the AAA rating bonds. They create $400 million of those AAA rated bonds, and then those are sold on the open market. So there's a bond market out there. If you study finance enough, personal investment, personal finance, commercial finance, there's an entire industry called the bond market where corporate bonds and government bonds and all kinds of treasury bonds. Well, these are private bonds. These private general obligation and revenue bonds are sold in the open market, and people and organizations buy these bonds in the open market. So what happens is large money buys the bonds. Now these bonds are going to be like 10-year bonds with a 10% repayment, something simple like that, 8%, 12%. There'll be a percentage rate that's tied to it. And so somebody who runs a pension fund and they have $500 million, insurance companies that have $300 million or $400 million in insurance monies they're dealing with, states that have insurance or have a retirement fund. So like the state of South Carolina has a retirement fund. It's got billions of dollars in it, and it's for all the state retirees. Well, there's a group that manages that, and their goal is to grow the retirement fund so that the retirees are drawing from it. There's money going to be at the end there. So all around the world is organizations managing big money. And big money steps in and they buy bonds all the time on the open market. And so they're not afraid to step in and buy. Maybe some groups will buy 100 million. Some groups will buy 50 million. Some groups might buy half of that 200 million. You never know. You might have one group steps